I will tell you that it's really, really nice to see you. I'm very, very excited about showing this off. There are a couple of you here in the wine industry, and you might want to know each other. So why don't we say quickly, Mac, why don't you introduce yourself, tell us what you're doing. Alix and Alex, you guys tell us what you're doing really quickly, and then you guys can do a little networking after.
Sure, yeah. I own a distribution company in Chicago, and we focus on natural wines, a lot of which are from Italy, and a lot actually from the Lazio, Umbria, Tuscany region. So pretty close to the school, but and I work in a shop 2 days a week as well, selling a lot of different, yeah, mostly natural wines, so organic, no chemical intervention, low, I guess, chemical additives during the winemaking.
That's fantastic. And Alix and Alex, what are you guys doing?
Yeah, so kind of crazy. We're working together. We didn't get married. Okay, that's why. Sorry. I married someone else. He's great. He works here too. We started a company about three and a half years ago, I guess 4 years ago. I guess technically I started it, and then Alex was one of the first employees, but in pure classic form, you know, we decided to go against the grain and bastardize the industry a little bit. So we put wine in cans, which is kind of interesting. I don't know if any of you guys have heard of Bev or seen it or been targeted by ads, but the company's named Bev, and it's obviously female founded, and our whole narrative is really about changing the way women are perceived and portrayed in the alcohol industry in the US, and really trying to fight the good fight also against toxic masculinity as we do it. So our tagline is made by chicks, and then we have a sub brand in Good Dudes, which is where Alex comes in. And Alex runs operations. So he's our VP of ops, and he's the guy that actually puts the wine in the can. And I'm the one that makes his life miserable by coming up with new ideas all the time.
Thoroughly, yep.
So that's pretty much what we're up to.
Things haven't changed since you guys met. That's really what
not a little.
So what I was hoping to do today is introduce you to 3 students from 19 who did their capstone project on wine. And I'll share my screen, and then I'll take you through the process that we use when I developed this unit, which continues to evolve, and I continue to, I hope, improve it pedagogically. So let me try to share my screen quickly, and then I'll introduce the 3 presenters with me. I'm letting Ned in. Poor guy's knocking on the door. Let's see, Susan. It is. Here we go. One thing here. Okay, so you see here 3 students: Savannah McCall on the left, JJ Hellerman on the right, and Isa Leonardi on the far right, with the founder of a wine museum in Umbria. And he gave us a tour of his wine museum, and we gifted him a bottle of the school's red wine. But if the 3 of you will introduce yourselves really quickly and say what you're doing right now too. But let's start with, let's go left to right. So Savannah, if you go first.
Hi everyone, I'm Savannah. What was it again? I am currently in Salt Lake City, Utah. I am just kind of skiing and working and doing a little bit of school, but kind of waiting for coronavirus to pass. Yeah, class of 2019, and yeah, here I am.
We're also currently in Salt Lake City, Utah, doing the same thing.
Woo!
Way to go.
Yeah.
Well, you guys can meet up at Snowbird after this session, okay? JJ.
Hi, I'm JJ Hellerman. I'm currently in Boston, Massachusetts. I'm studying classics and political science at Boston University. And no skiing for me, but maybe soon.
And Isa.
Hi, everyone. So yeah, I'm Isa. I'm currently in Naples, Florida, but I'm studying at the University of McGill and doing environmental science.
Fantastic. So the three of you all did your capstone project on wine because you were interested in different facets of it. I know that two of you have with you your capstone takeaway. JJ, Isa, would you say a little bit about what's in there?
Yeah, so basically there's three parts to it, and it's kind of the story behind wine, and then there's the process, and then the grapes. So I did the process, what we learned in Italy, whole way through, just our hands and each other, nothing else. Yeah.
And JJ, if you'll take this opportunity, because I know you need to leave early, to tell us a little bit about what you dived into. And since yours involved some of the stuff at the end of this project, we'll kind of start there.
Yeah, so I think that the program at SYA through agroecology kind of made me interested in particularly Central Italian wines. You know, I kind of was curious as to why they don't really have the same reputation as those from the north or those from the south. You know, my family was Pugliese, and so they had a lot to say about Pugliese wines, but usually we hear only about Sicily and maybe northern Italy. And so I decided to get certified as a wine taster in Rome through this program called the WSET, the Wine and Spirit Education Trust. And so I went through the first level, and then I decided to keep going through the second. And for our final project, I went through all of the different regions of Italy, and I kind of made notes of my own tasting notes and sort of the facts about the most popular wines in each region. And I also went through the DOCs and DOCGs, which was really, really interesting. And my capstone paper was kind of trying to understand how the history of Central Italian wines compared to that of the northern wines and the southern wines, and why in some ways Central Italy was left behind by the process of kind of consolidating these, you know, these DOCs and DOCGs. But at the same time, I'm sure as Mac is familiar with, it kind of leaves a lot more room for creativity in Central Italy, which I had a lot of fun with.
And you also ran a class by yourself in because I don't think you can do this in high school in the United States, and only SYA students would really appreciate this.
I did, yeah. We did a wine tasting in agroecology class. So I made a Prezi presentation. I still have it on my Prezi public account. And we kind of went through the basics of wine tasting. It was really, really interesting. And I think a lot of students, you know, came up to me afterwards, like, I can't believe that we just had a science class where we learned how to taste wine.
And Savannah, talk a little bit about your host family.
So I was fortunate enough to be living with a host family who has a cantina at the house that I was living at, and then they also owned and operated vineyards. And so kind of what my life was about while I was there was wine. People would knock on our doors at all hours of the days, just being like, vino! And so I got like full immersion into the wine community in Viterbo. And one thing that was really cool kind of surrounding this project was we would go to Rome kind of like every other weekend or maybe once a month and kind of showcase our wines. And it would be like a convention, I guess, where you would bring your wine and people would try it and maybe buy it for restaurants, and everybody from the region would do that. And so one thing that was cool is I was just kind of there walking around, and I decided like, hey, what if I talk to these people? And so my whole section on it is, I guess, the story of wine and what makes wine special is, you know, like the taste, and we love to enjoy it for its alcoholic qualities, but also for like the story it tells and for the passion you can feel behind it. And kind of what sparked my whole idea behind it was this one man, and he had like these crystal blue eyes, and I don't know how else to describe it, but I could taste like the passion in his eyes in the wine. And you guys will understand that, I think, because you guys understand wine, but it was just like I could feel his essence in the wine. And it kind of, that was my section of the book, of the story behind wine. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, I've admitted 2 other people. I know that 3 actually. Sophie came on, Julian McMillan came on, and Ned came on. It's interesting they all came on at the same time because they are 3 on this call besides you that have tasted this vintage. They've been to Italy, and so welcome to the 3 of you. I'm really glad you're here. So the 3 of you, JJ, Savannah, and Isaac, if you'll just intervene as I go through this. What I've done is I've set up this presentation. It'll be bilingual in this sense. Alex Booty said he would only join today if we did this primarily in English, and he's here, so we have to honor that. In 2017,
that was mostly me. Non parlo più italiano.
Bravo, bravo. So in 2017, we rewrote the mission for SYA to be deliberately experiential and deliberately hands-on. You've all been to SYA, you know that that's part of what we do, but we actually just turned up the knob to say that was really who we're going to become. At the same time, there had been a lot of talk. 2 of you on this call have been admissions director associates with our school, Susanna and Ned, and you know that there was a push for more to offer a science class. We created a science class then that I think can only be offered here. There's nobody else doing what we're doing, taking full advantage of this place, and so we wanted a hands-on experience. Ned has drunk it. Julian has had a taste. The 3 of you who talked had a taste. And someone else, Sarah Bonifair, is trying to get on. I'm going to let her on. What I wanted to start with was to show you real quickly here that anybody who knows anything about the life cycle, and I was going to say Mac has been to the garden where we make this wine, because Mac, quickly, you were doing a sort of internship or doing some research in Umbria at the time. Could you say a little bit about that?
Yeah, I was actually helping out with a couple producers to harvest the grapes and then do the initial like winemaking. And I believe that was in like September of 2016. Okay. I know you were just getting started with this project, so you showed me the garden and I believe the little cantina in that back kind of.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's where we do it. Yeah. So by starting school at Santa Rosa, as you all did, and then this project is one of the first ones we do. What some of you might know and some of you hadn't thought is that basically beginning the project at the end of a grapes growing season. Because we actually do come back and we prune a grape arbor. It's not the same grapes we use because it's a eating grape arbor, but we do some pruning and some maintenance of that. But essentially we begin our project at the end of the grapes vines growing season. The first thing that a winemaker will do is measure to know when to harvest. This is a modern phenomenon. What most farmers did in the past was taste it and know the time of year was right, but 1 or 2 days can make a difference. So this little instrument that I show you here measures what's called degrees of Brix. Some people use Babbo. Locally, that's what's used, but it's essentially the number of grams of sugar in per solution. So 22 degrees of Brix is 22 grams of sugar in 100 grams of grape juice. And 22 is an ideal amount for red grapes. Any less than that, then you're going to end up with a weak wine. And the students essentially are tasked with this, even though we scheduled the day ourselves. In the first year, I'm going to show you some white that we did in the first year, but the first year we did red, we put it on the calendar, and I was telling Sergio, who was Savannah's host dad, we're ready to go. And he says, oh, I'm not sure the grapes are ready. And we went and looked and we got lucky. A real winery would not do it that way. They would harvest when the grapes are ready. And so we've learned to schedule this thing now when the grapes are ready and we just move the schedule around because the entire school participates in it. It's not great to try to harvest on a schedule. You harvest on the grape schedule. Then there's a specialized verb in Italian, vendemmiare, which means to harvest grapes. We are fortunate that Sergio, Savannah's host dad, manages a piece of property for a private guy that he adds it to his grapes where we can walk from school. Do the three of you remember doing that? Okay. It happened to be a beautiful day like the one you see here. This was taken last year. And what you see is a Merlot. Let's see if the three from last year remember why Merlot is called Merlot, or if anybody on this call knows why we call Merlot Merlot. Where did it get its name? Okay. Merlot is the first red grape that comes ripe in the season. And the word for blackbird in French is Merlot. And in fact, the word for blackbird in Italian is merlo without the T. And so it got its name when the birds started eating this grape legendarily. It was when it was indicated that they needed to harvest and make the wine. So we've done a Merlot a couple of years running because it fits into our schedule, but he has on the same property, he's got a Cabernet and he's got a Sangiovese. Mac will recognize the Sangiovese is the most popular grape in all of Central Italy. The JJ recognized that too, but what you see here is Merlot. We then take the grapes in the scan van to the cantina, and this is the only time we actually use an internal combustion engine. So our wine is considered kilometer zero. Based on the amount of equipment we've got, we usually pick between 250 and 280 kilos, or 2.5 to 2.8 quintali, and we bring them to our cantina. What I've got there on the left is, because it was the best photo of Zoe, just absolutely having a ball, we harvested white grapes the first year and purchased some locally from a vineyard that produces est, and brought them to the garden and squeezed them. So spremere, the verb in Italian that means to juice, and di raspare. So those of you who've ever done this before, and some of you on this call have, we asked the students to take the stems out of close to 500 pounds of grapes by hand. Anybody tell us what that's like?
Tedious. Yep.
Except, Isa, you were saying that there was a lot in your year.
Yeah, this was probably one of my favorite experiences from SYA, especially from in the school. I was just talking to Sophie actually an hour ago about how we just loved this stage. It was tedious, but we were all together as the entire school. It was just awesome. Like we were together doing it, and it was cool.
And you have a classmate named August, and I was going around giving instructions, and before I could even get the instructions out, August held his hand up and said, "Mr. Scanlon, we got this." And for the rest of the day, I just watched, which is exactly what we wanted to do. Can anyone say why you don't want the stems in your wine? Mac would know.
Do you want me to answer?
Yeah.
Depending on the kind of wine you want to make, the stems are typically like discarded or destemmed because they have kind of a bitter and to some winemakers' palates, like unpleasant, kind of gritty quality in terms of the tannins of the wine. Some people will use them to structure their wine depending on what the typical wine of the region is. But I think for most Central Italian producers, they don't want to use the stems because they have this kind of green quality, this vegetal quality that takes away from the fruit, I guess.
And Alex Buti, you're in the production side. Do you guys know anything about the destemming process or?
Not specifically, because I'll be perfectly honest that we take over the wine at a little bit later stage than you're describing now, but we do have a pretty heavy hand in the selection process. And one of the things that we do, because our wine varietals are all going into cans, and the can presents an opportunity for people to maybe actively taste for something unpleasant that they wouldn't otherwise, we tend to make ours really light and try to make them as non-offensive as possible. And so we actually take our grapes off the vine 5 to 10 days early, depending, especially our red, so that it has the right weight to come out of a can and what people are expecting from there. So it's an interesting balance, because I think that when we were first figuring it out, there was some pressure from winemaking to choose what they had deemed to be the best blend that they could put together. But I think that when you're overcoming the maybe preconceived notion of what you're going to get out of a can, you have to sort of avoid that and make it easy for the end consumer.
Well, and just to add to that, I think what's been interesting and kind of cool for us is, like, we were really we started 4 years ago, and I don't know how many of you guys are in the US now, but like the canned wine industry is booming. And it's been pretty crazy. And so we've gotten a pretty interesting tailwind. But you know, when I first started and was kind of out there by myself, it was so interesting to me how much chemistry goes into the process, and how you can really like back into a taste, you know, and have a profile that you want. And we were actually the first TTB government approved 0 sugar wine in the US. So that's something that Alex has worked pretty hard to do, and it makes it light and really, really drinkable straight out of the can. But it's been an interesting process. Scanlon, you'll find this entertaining, but when I first went to my winemaker, unlike all you sophisticated folks, I was like, you know, the word I'm really looking for here is chuggable. And they just looked at me like I had 6 heads. And I was like, that's just really the vibe we're going for here, is just really chuggable. He was like, I believe sessionable is the proper, you know, way to say that kindly. But anyways, ours are super light.
Stop letting her come to those stages.
So 0 sugar, can you say what you mean by 0 sugar?
So it's fermented to dryness, so that there's no residual sugar in the blends. And then before they go to canning, we actually send them to a NutriScience lab and get them analyzed to make sure that they actually come in at less than 0.5 grams.
Okay, and I thought you don't do any back sugaring before the can, so that none of your wines are fizzy. Okay.
They are carbonated, but slightly. We say a little fizzy on the can, but they're carbonated at the time of production.
Okay, so they're carbonated, not back sugared. Okay.
Yeah.
It's fascinating. So the hands-on process is, I think, key to the learning. And it actually, the reason it's key to learning is by touching it, and you guys remember this and learn it really well. We'll get back to Mac here in just a second, but with Mac, you said very low intervention on what you're adding. So you produce a wine that doesn't add any yeast, or you
Yeah, that's the category of wines that I sell for a living. Basically is the idea is that when you farm in organics, the whole surface area of your vineyard will have its own yeast population that kind of attaches to the grapes and will allow them to ferment without any added yeast. And a lot of people talk about chemical additives in the winemaking process, but it's really this aspect of the farming, like the living farm, that produces a very healthy fruit that will allow for a natural fermentation. And that's kind of the crux, or the most important part in this kind of natural wine category.
So what we do here, the way this experiment and this unit has evolved is, to a good majority of our wine, we add yeast. We add a selected yeast, which is the most, it's basically a champagne yeast. And and we keep a portion aside and don't add yeast. And what happens is that we don't have a strong enough, probably because of the way that the whole vineyard has been treated, possibly with substances over time, it doesn't have a strong enough wild yeast population. So that takes some time and some dedication. And I think you, when you were in Umbria, you were studying those vineyards that were looking at that, weren't you?
I truly was in the thick of the harvest season, so it wasn't the time to do a lot of research, I guess. But when I started harvesting the grapes, they were making the wine as that was going on. So you could tell, like literally the tanks are just bubbling over without any additives. So you could just see, and the vineyards themselves there, you know, to an industrial farmer would almost look unkempt. They're full of wild grasses, flowers, herbs. They're properly taken cared for by hand, but they're not these manicured rows of trained vines all the time.
That's so cool. Do your wines add sulfites?
No sulfites at all, including the bottling process, which is what most winemakers will use simply as a preservative for export, or for like aging in terms of like a wine being good 20 years down the road. A lot of people will add sulfites, but the wines that I work with don't have any additives, including SO2. So they can taste almost like grape juice when they're young, but they age just like any other wine and have a lot of complexity as well.
Okay, so the practice around here for what normally people do is as the addition of sulfites at 3 grams per 100 liters to offset the oxidation process. But we take part of our lot each year and do it without. It pretty quickly disintegrates. So that wine goes to vinegar pretty quickly, within a year, even in bottles, because of the contact with oxygen that I'll explain in just a minute. But students then get an idea of what it means to add these things, and the additives essentially are sulfites and selected yeasts, which is a stock picture that I got for you there. It's hard to see what's on the left there, but I've taken a picture straight down the barrel when we've dumped in the destemmed and squeezed grapes. And what we'll do at that point, we have Victor on the right there measuring the white from a different year, but we then watch as the sugars decrease and the alcohol increases. And we use that simple little tool that he has there in a graduated cylinder that measures sugars. Each day goes down to about a 10-day limit when all the sugars are eaten up. But as Alex will tell you, he just said that it may take a little longer at times, but we don't do it nearly as quantitatively as you seem to do it, Alex, because you guys are doing something commercially, but we know it's always done in about 10 days. Beer, for instance, some ales only take 3 days. Other lagers might take up to 3 months, but wine in this area, especially the reds, take about 10 days. Now, we did make a white the first day. Alex, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I actually had a question for you because sulfites are really interesting, particularly when they interact with aluminum. And so we've had, I was just wondering like what shelf life looks like if you're not using sulfites, because for us, it's a really fine line, because if you use too many, it messes up the nose when you crack the can. But if you don't use enough, like the shelf life deteriorates extremely quickly. So we've had to really tweak the sulfite count.
So Mac might be able to answer that better.
I'm not sure. It might be different in terms of whether it's in a can or a glass bottle, but yeah, I mean, the number of producers that aren't using any SO2 is like a blip, essentially. It's a niche kind of experimental or like uber traditional winemaking, I guess. But it's really difficult to produce without adding SO2 because of oxidation, or like your wine going brown or your wine turning to vinegar. It's not like you can just go to school and learn how to make this kind of wine. And you need the proper organic source. So, but a lot of wine has, through fermentation, a sort of natural sulfite to it, which is not added. So when I sell a wine in my shop and someone says they're allergic to sulfites, the bottle has to say contains sulfites, which is just a government regulation thing, even if it doesn't have any additives. So it's a little tricky and confusing. But there are other additives you can use, I guess, that aren't sulfites to judge for oxidation or any kind of vinegary type of thing. But I'm really not the expert in terms of that part of the winemaking process.
So, and we add them here, Alix, as antioxidants to stave off the oxidation process. And that I know of, nobody's putting wine in cans in Italy.
Not yet. Well,
it's
either soon.
There's also been a lot of progress with the can itself, right?
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. I mean, Alex can speak more to that. There's also just an international can shortage, which has been fun. By the way, does this mean you let them drink wine now?
If it's supervised by me, I wouldn't call it drinking. They taste. And
what the heck is up with that? We got in so much trouble.
You weren't supposed to talk about that. So I'm going to call on Ned and Perry, because this is our vintage from the first year, and I'm holding it upside down on purpose. Ned and Perry, can you talk about this? Because you've tasted this before. You guys there? Ned?
Yeah.
Yeah, what'd you do here?
I remember, I'm remembering something that a winemaker said at a tasting in Sonoma, which feels somewhat accurate. It's like sweet baby Jesus in silk pajamas sliding down the back of your throat. That was my experience with that wine. No, it was great. It was great. I think what made it all the better was just knowing the story behind it. And it was kind of fun.
The bottle of it.
Yeah.
Can you all see the bottom here? Okay, so I've got this one. There's a plug in there. So by storing this upside down, the sediment came to the top. Ned, what did I make you do?
So what I remember is kind of holding it downwards. Is that right? And then just
I put it in
popping
a bucket
it
of
open
ice.
and
I put it in a bucket of
freezing
ice.
it.
Yeah.
So it would push that stuff to the top and the liquid in there wouldn't come out. And opening it just shoves the plug out. You get all that stuff out in that way.
Yeah, so that's just,
it was
you lost
riveting.
A little bit of wine, but you capped it right away, and you had your, so there's two bottles of this one left. The reason we don't do white anymore, as your wine, it's harder to do. It's a much harder process. And the word on your screen, macerare, it's better to say in Italian because I have to be careful in English. It's macerate. Be careful. What does macerate mean? It's a form of osmosis that extracts substances into the wine. So by red wine sitting on its skins for 10 days, as the alcohol level increases, it pulls out different substances from the skins, colors, flavors, aromas, all kinds of things. That is a maceration process. So if you drink bitters that have different flavors in them, it's usually because alcohol has been extracting the flavors, the bitter flavors from herbs. And that's maceration. So maceration happens with red wines. Many of you who've taken this class know that you can make white wine from red grapes, so long as you don't let the skins be in contact with it for any length of time. So the minute you'd squeeze them, you'd remove the solids. Red wine only comes from contact with its skins. We get about a 60 to 70% yield by mass. So if we have 100 kilos of grapes, we get about 60 to 70 kilos of liquid in the end. And this testing that you see Victor doing over there is just a densometer that starts dropping down to 0 as those 10 days pass. Questions on this or comments? The next step is the fermentation stage, and rimontare, which is known in English often as punching down the cap. Isa or even Sophie can talk about this stage because I will have a memory for the rest of my life that they had so much fun doing this.
Yeah, and I think Sophie had to leave to go to class, but we couldn't find any pictures, which is a bummer. But basically the pushing down of the cap, for those of you who don't know, is just the skins basically get pushed to the top by the carbon dioxide. And basically we go every, I think it was twice a day for 10 days and use this huge wooden stick thing to just kind of push them back down. It was a fun time. And
especially in the first days when the fermentation is really vigorous, that first push down creates this like lion's roar and the escaping of gas. And if you put your nose in that, you can actually just recoil because the carbonic acid hits you so hard. In Italy, each year, that carbonic acid is heavy, but it is suffocating. And a couple of farmers each year die because of suffocation from massive carbonic acid that takes the place of their oxygen. Not good. We're very careful and keep it well ventilated. And at the industrial level, what they'll do simply in much bigger tanks is attach a hose to the bottom where there's a valve, run that hose on the top and pump the wine back over it. So again, sticking on with our hands-on approach, we actually do it by hand, and students have to get down there with me twice a day. It's very important that this process happens in the presence of oxygen, or else it will just stall. We need oxygen in this phase. In these first 10 days, oxygen is our friend. So after 10 days, the process in Italian is called travasare, which means to spill over the top. Or in the case of us, we take it off the bottom because we will not do that push down on the last stage so that the skins stay up and our tank has a valve at the bottom and we draw it off. So what you see here is simply not the best picture of what's going on there. In the foreground there is the top of our press, because we are going to take those skins and press what we can out of them to make a different quality of wine. That's travasare. In time, once we've taken the solids off, there are still many smaller suspended particles in the solution. And we just wait. On an industrial level production, they will just filter it and not have to do this anymore. We use gravity and time so that in November, we will just drain it off the top and let the stuff at the bottom, it's a kind of a sludge or a slime. That is what's known as dregs. The dregs are what's left down there, and it's from the dregs that they make grappa. They'll distill this. Savannah, any word on making grappa? Were you there when Sergio makes grappa on a hobo fire?
Oh yeah.
Tell us about that.
It was honestly kind of a secret process. Like, he didn't want to share his grappa recipe, but it's really strong.
No, let me tell you, it's not secret, it's illegal.
Yeah, he was like, yeah, I noticed when we were doing it, it was at the kind of the beginning of my stay there, so I was still not great at Italian, and I remember him kind of sneaking around. And I was like,
That's
what's
right.
happening?
It helps that his brother's a cop, and he's a fireman, but they make a little grappa moonshine.
Mm-hmm.
We do it here too. So each time that this happens, we have less deposit at the bottom, but we've taken our wine and made another kind of wine. Again, the picture was better when we did it with white. What we would see here are red skins normally, but we press the skins, and the wine that comes off of being pressed is called torchiato. Torchiato means that it's been underneath a torque, okay, underneath a press. It is a lower quality wine. And so a lot of stuff that you'll see in a box at a much lower price is often this wine here. Whereas what's called the fiore, or the flower, is the wine that's only been in contact with the skins only gently. The substances in the skins getting squeezed out, they're more tannins, a lot of the polyphenols, they just render that stronger and rougher as a flavor, but people will buy it, and you just can't sell it for more. People will stretch their fiore out by mixing some of it in, but if you look, and you've often wondered, why is there such a vast difference in prices? At least in Italy and in Europe, in France, when you have a bottle for $2.95 with the same kind of grape for 15 is usually the difference between Torchiato and Fiore. We keep them both. For white, you will often mix them because you do your Torchiato the same day. They just don't sit there. So these are not super interesting, but what you see at this point, oxygen has now become our enemy. Fermentation is done. On the left there, I've just taken a picture of our tank that has on top of it a float surrounded by basically a bicycle tire connected to a bicycle pump. And that as it sits on top, you pump it up and you seal the top of your tank so there is now no more contact with oxygen. That happens after the first 10 days. On the right, the shape of that vessel that you might see around is specific for this process because you fill your vessel up to the neck, and you put a cap on top of it so that only that much oxygen at all can be in contact with it. The Torchiato, it comes out at about 25% by volume. So if you had 100 liters total, 25 will be Torchiato, 75 will be Fiore, and now you follow the same process for getting the dregs off. Which is what we do twice a year. And then we bottle. I didn't have a really good photograph of the actual bottling process, but the great thing about all the equipment in Italy is that you can find it in a used store and you can buy corks for 5 cents each, and the students are then asked to design their own labels. The one on the right there is JJ already left. To answer Alix's question, students who make this wine can take as many bottles home as they want, Alix, but they have to take a picture of it corked with a host parent to make sure it got home. Okay, now JJ's host dad is smiling and not showing me the cork, so I'm not sure that actually happened. And if you know Tonino, he's probably just messing with me. This was the tasting glasses that JJ used that we did in March. And then it goes to be aged. So the aging is done. What Max saw in our cantina is at ground level. It stays pretty cool, but not cool enough in the summer. And so I take the bottles to a friend's house who has a cantina that's 6 meters underground, and it's a constant 8 degrees C under there. On the right is 2019's vintage, and on the left, what we've done is instead of a plastic capsule, we've put on a wax capsule, and I'll let you get a good look at our sigla. And then you all need to come back and toast. Questions about process for our presenters or our wine experts or anybody that has a comment?
Is it good?
I have given this to a friend who has a tasting club, and I asked them to do it blind. They couldn't believe that students made it. It is quite good. It's fruity. It has a really nice nose. It's fruity but dry, so it kind of disguises sweetness with fruitiness. It is very good. Of the red ones there I showed you, Mac, let's see if I can go back. That's how many of the really good ones, the ones on the right are not quite aged, but there are that many bottles, so you will be able to taste it at some point.
I have a quick question about, obviously it's a year-long program, but the importance of the vintage and how the weather and the climate during the most important stages of the grapes growing is really important as to the resulting taste of the wine.
Okay.
Because if it's cold during the year, then you won't have enough, or you'll have more trouble getting the grapes ripe enough. But if it's hot, they'll overcook and often make a kind of jammy, like baked tasting wine. So I'm wondering whether the students learned anything about that, and whether you've tasted different vintages of this and how different they are.
What you see on the screen, the one on the left is a year older and it's a year better. The one on the right may have also problems. It's not quite as good. The 2019 is just not quite as good because we harvested on that schedule. That's the hypothesis. The one I'm holding here, and why we gave up on white, is because white needs a lot more temperature regulation. But if you recall, the summer of 2017 in Europe had a heat wave called Lucifer. Okay, and the heat wave Lucifer might have had an effect that when we were fermenting this one, Mac, it totally stalled. And I gave it to an enologist, and so we were doing that the Zuccherino test that we're doing there on the right. It got down to about 4 sugars and it wouldn't go anywhere. And what he had me do was add ammonia. I added nitrogen, and then it finished, because that drought and that heat did not allow the grapes themselves to bring up enough nitrogen from the soil in that heat wave. It was because the heat wave was also immensely dry. And so we did to the wine, contrary to the kind of wine you're making, what the soil and the weather wouldn't do for us that year. So that's a partial answer to your question. I've been doing this for 4 years, so I learned so much. And I tell the students, you know, that you can make a career out of this, as some of you are doing. And there's so many people around here that just do their own, and they all do it a little differently. But yeah, there's all kinds of things that so many variables. In fact, one of the assessment things we're looking at, if I can come back as a teacher and say, we're going to have students design on paper, because you only get one chance per year at wine. We're going to have them have an experimental design in which they manipulate one variable, and they should predict what might happen by manipulating that variable. Maybe you don't add yeast. Maybe you don't add sulfites. Maybe you let it sit on the skins for 5 days, you know, whatever. There's so many variables, but that's just part of the pedagogical side. I'm going to unshare my screen so I can start seeing you all again, see if you guys have questions or comments.